This is On Point. I'm Jane Clayson in for Tom Ashbrook. We're delving into the untold stories of the ruthless women who terrorized the seas as pirates. Does it sound like an early form of feminism? In the studio with me, Laura Sook Duncombe, a lawyer by trade, author of the new book, Pirate Women, the Princesses, Prostitutes, and Privateers Who Ruled the Seven Seas. Piracy is one of the oldest professions in the world. You start the book by saying that as long as there has been a sea to sail on, there have been pirates. They have sailed across every millennium. Popular images of pirates that we know come from what's called the Golden Age of piracy, mostly in the Caribbean, from the 1650s to the early 1700s. Tell us about that.
Piracy has been around forever. It's evolved and changed over the years. I talk a little bit in the book about how different women fall under the category of pirates based on their time. But if there's something to steal, people will steal it. And so they are specifically sea-based, which divides them from sort of the common lowbrow robber. Women pirates stretches back as far as piracy stretches back. We've got pirates on Egyptian scrolls. We have pirates in ancient Greece. We have Queen Tuta of Illyria. We have Artemisia, who's written up in Herodotus.
If pirate women are so prevalent in history, why are they so seldom known?
Women are frequently left out of history because women don't record history as often. Certainly in the Middle Ages, you have these Christian monks who are writing things down, sort of editing things as they see fit. There's a bias against women in a lot of historical writing, particularly some of the ancient Greece. There's this Hellenic bias against women. So even when stories are told, they're told in a way that doesn't ring true. So we live in a wonderful time. We've got women storytellers, women historians, and a lot more of these women are coming to light. Anne Chambers wrote a biography of Grace O'Malley that really sort of brought her to the world. If not for her and many other female historians who are telling these stories, they just wouldn't get told.
Let me bring another voice into the conversation here from Huntsville, Alabama, Bennerson Little. He's a leading expert on historical and modern piracy and author of The Golden Age of Piracy, The Truth Behind Pirate Myths. He's also a retired Navy SEAL.
Pretty harsh life at first. Really, we're looking at about 1655 when the English captured Jamaica. That kind of became a central base for buccaneering and gave rise to what already existed on a small scale, quasi-legitimate sea roving, primarily against Spain. It expanded very quickly through most of the 17th century, and then near the end it began to be suppressed, primarily because trade became much more important. And these buccaneers and filibusters, who were at first good for plundering Spain, keeping Spain at heel, protecting the colonies, became a liability. They began to be suppressed. Now you have, by now, 3 or 4 generations of sea roving. Early 18th century comes along, the end of Queen Anne's War. Suddenly you have a whole lot of unemployed privateers. They're briefly given commissions to raid the Spanish. They abuse the commissions are revoked, so they turn pirate, and then you have the last few years of the Golden Age of piracy. A little bit different from the first few generations in the late 17th century, primarily because these men, almost entirely men with a couple of exceptions, went after ships of all nations, basically. They turned true pirates as opposed to privateers or quasi-privateers. Essentially, they'd had national support prior to that. When they began attacking everybody, they lost all national support. Naval presence was weak, so they were able to get away with a lot of things for about a decade. Then eventually the government started putting money into getting the navies where they belonged and pretty much suppressed them.
Oh, that's interesting.
I absolutely agree with Ben. They started out with a license to plunder, and then all heck broke loose. When you give these dangerous men and women, you can attack people, but only some people. You're counting on them to follow the rules, and that sort of spectacularly backfired, which brought the explosion of the Golden Age, but then ultimately the downfall of piracy in the Caribbean and, in fact, the world.
Yeah, it was very difficult to put this back in the bag, so to speak. Once you've got several generations of people whose lifestyle and culture and tradition is sea roving, raiding the Spanish, it had to be suppressed militarily, naval force. If you go back to the Middle Ages, piracy, privateering, and naval operations were virtually indistinguishable. Talking about the Golden Age, there were times in which naval vessels and naval seamen were released as privateers. The French, particularly in the 1690s, did that. Basically, their fleet was bottled up, so they gave their naval seamen permission to function as privateers, to put it simply. But for the most part, we have this image of pirates as being naval deserters. Really, they were primarily merchant seamen. Most of them came from the merchant classes, or in the case of the Caribbean, they were kind of a hodgepodge of wanderers, beachcombers, boucan hunters, merchant seamen, some naval seamen occasionally. But again, the study of piracy is so vast that what you claim as a rule for one period might be violated in a different
for another. So what would have the climate been like historically for some of these women becoming pirates?
Generally, they'd have to be outstanding in some manner. They are leading men, after all. Whether we like it or not, these were primarily male-dominated related professions with the associated sexism. I think it helps that most of these women came aboard with a certain sense of family connection, often from fathers. That gives these women a certain status that might overwhelm any particular chauvinism some men may feel. Women would also definitely have to have been performers. They would have to have known what they were doing, have solid leadership skills, more so probably than their male counterparts. And this is one of the things I find exceptional about women pirates and privateers, is that they were probably far better leaders than most of their male counterparts.
In what way?
They would have had no choice but to be, whether it's in managing people or whether it's in a particular skills in seamanship, but in some particular way they would have absolutely had to have been at least as good as the best of the men. Just tends to be how it goes. If you're a woman, you pretty much got to prove yourself, and it would have been no different in the past.
Women pirates are just as much a part of the history as the male pirates. They've just been left off the record for so long.
Even historical examples of female pirates commanding men, right?
Yes, absolutely. Artemisia was the commander of her own ship. She sailed under Xerxes, Cheng Yi-sao, who commanded a fleet that was larger than many legitimate navies at the time. Lots of women right at the helm.
Even under the belief in some cultures that women at sea were bad luck.
Yes, this is a common trope, and that's one of the first things people say to me. They say, well, aren't women bad luck in the water? Well, tell that to Cheng Yi-sao's fleet, who, when they finally retired at the behest of the Chinese government because there was no other way to stop them, the Chinese government gave them a pension. So they lived out their days on government money, a lot of which they could have stolen. So it's apparently not bad luck for everyone.
You talk in the book about the near sacred relationship between sailor and the sea and pirate women. Did they interfere with man's storied and complex relationship with the sea?
We don't have any diaries of male pirates who were like, man, that woman on this ship is really a drag. They do, as far as historians are concerned, because they're just left out. We've got Hemingway's The Old Man in the Sea. We don't have the old woman in the sea. It's easy for men to write about taking off in the wild sea, and you don't see women in that picture culturally and across many cultures. So I think they interfere maybe in theory, but clearly not in practice, because there were so many women pirates and many of them were so successful.
Well, and the sea and the things associated with the sea are typically feminine,
yes.
Right? Ships are named for women. Women are featured as the buxom figureheads on the bows of boats. The undiscovered islands in the sea are virgin that are conquered by the colonizing men, and on and on.
There's lots of imagery that the sea is this wild, mysterious creature. Mermaids, sea witches, the sirens, that's all feminine. And so you've got man versus nature, and woman is part of nature. And so to have a woman conquering this feminine nature, it ruins the picture a little bit, ruins the optics, but clearly in reality is not a problem at all.
What united these vastly different, diverse people beyond the peg legs and the eye patches and the rum and the parrots and all the rest that we think about?
Most of those are things that were actually creation of Robert Louis Stevenson and not really part of the pirate lore at all.
Historically, it was not easy for a woman to cast off her petticoats and her corsets and really tradition to take up arms as a pirate. Why did they do it?
Well, that's a different answer for every pirate. Many went to sea to escape harsh childhood. Many sailed, particularly during the Golden Age, away from their home countries in search for a better life, a new start, another chance, but also in search of adventure. There's money to be had. Get in on the fun. I think they were all united in certainly a desire for riches, but a desire to live outside the confines of society, to sort of be their own men and women, take what they want, and just freedom. Like you said at the beginning of the interview, this desire to really live their life in the way that they wanted without anyone telling them what to do and how to do it.
Female pirates run the gamut from princess to pauper. We've referred to them as raiders and sea dogs and buccaneers and freebooters and swashbucklers.
Yeah.
You write, at the heart of piracy is freedom. Freedom from society, freedom from law, freedom from conscience.
Yes. The one thing that does unite all of these diverse women pirates is this desire for freedom, to be the master of one's own destiny and to go after what they want with reckless abandon. And I think that's something in essence, if not in principle, that everyone can get behind, is the desire to just take control of your own life.
And at the heart of it, was there a criminal element?
There's absolutely a criminal element. They are stealing. They're not pillaging and having a firm handshake at the end. There were definitely pirates who were very bloody. They enjoyed the gore. They enjoyed the stealing and the robbing. But there was also, during the Golden Age, the way pirate captains divided up treasure was signed on beforehand. There were articles, and every crew member signed this contract that said, I will take this much, I will take this much. There was disability pay. If you lost an arm or a leg, you got a certain share of the treasure. So in many ways, it was more egalitarian egalitarian than the Royal Navy at the time, for example. So it's this very strange mix. I don't want to say that they were noble creatures. They are criminals, but they took care of their own. They governed themselves.
Oh, a pirate's life is a wonderful life, a roving over the sea. Give me a career as a
This is On Point. I'm Jane Clayson in for Tom Ashbrook. We're talking about the incredible untold stories of pirate women. Tell us about Grace O'Malley.
If anyone knows a woman pirate, frequently Grace O'Malley comes up, thanks largely due to the incredible work of Anne Chambers. She was an Irish pirate. She grew up in a pirating family and was in control of a fleet. There are numbers of legends about her. Probably the most exciting was her going head-to-head with Queen Elizabeth. Her son was captured by this sort of villainous English official, and Grace wrote directly to the Queen and said, "You need to let go of my son, and if you do, I will sail for you instead of against you." And actually went to Greenwich, met with Queen Elizabeth, and she came home with her son, and Richard Bingham ended up fired in disgrace. To be a fly on the wall in the room where these two women who had made a career of not caring what men thought about them, what they spoke about, how that conversation went is something I think about a lot, actually.
You talk a lot about her, and she has quite a story. The most successful pirate of all time was a woman.
Yeah, Cheng Yi-sao. She was an absolutely incredible pirate. The pirate's pirate. She's the one I said makes Blackbeard look like a joke. I think everyone should know about her. We don't know exactly where she started, but there are many reports that she was a prostitute on a flower boat in Canton and was allegedly kidnapped by Cheng Yi, the fierce pirate, and he offered, "Would you marry me?" And she goes, "Well, I want half of your stuff, and I want in on the business." And he was charmed by this. So she pirated alongside of him, and after his unfortunate death, she took the reins of the organization and expanded it exponentially.
She was an absolute terror to China.
Absolutely. Yeah. China sent many different people in to stop her, and she killed them one after the other. It seemed like there was absolutely nothing that could stop her, which is why eventually she surrendered to the government at the top of her game and said, "Hey, give us a pension, let my husband take a job in the Navy, and we'll go away." And China gladly took that offer because otherwise I think they would have been robbed blind by her.
She commanded a fleet of 400 ships in the early 19th century.
Yes. The estimates vary, but her navy was larger than many legitimate navies at the time. She had this unheard of fleet that was just massive. It's hard to think about, really, this woman doing all of this.
She explicitly banned the rape of female captives, punishable by death.
Yes. Every ship was a nation unto itself, and they had their own codes of conduct that everyone signed on to at the beginning of a voyage, and there were harsh penalties for violating those codes. Cheng Yi-sao is legendary for her strict codes of conduct, and she had some wacky stuff in there that cast aspersions on this idea of her banning rape. Some people say it was just about control, and she wasn't really for taking care of women, and she's not really the savior of women. Look at the time period she was coming from, but just the fact that she exerted such a strict code of conduct and required absolute adherence to her rules. I think that's really impressive.
Let's go to Area in Camden, Maine.
My question was specifically about women like Grace O'Malley. And I understand she gave birth on a boat while they were being attacked. And I was wondering if other women like Anne Chambers that were pirates also were these working moms. They had their pirating career, yet they had a family at home like Grace O'Malley did.
We don't have accounts of other women explicitly being children. Anne Bonny purportedly had Jack Rackham's child at some point, and that child was dropped off in Cuba, either given up for adoption or possibly died. Saida Al-Hurra had stepchildren, possibly children of her own, but as far as this incredible image of like a mom with a baby on her hip and a sword in the other hand, I think Grace O'Malley is it, which is possibly part of the reason why she's so endearing. Princess Alfhild is one whom I love. She is a Viking pirate. She was a princess who lived in sort of a Rapunzel-style tower, and then when a man came and sought her hand, she slipped out the back door and took to sea and became a pirate and had this wonderful adventure with her girlfriends, sort of sailing, plundering, but they were eventually captured by Prince Alf, who was still after her after all this time, and she went home, she married him, she had a baby, and the story is told in a very sort of romantic comedy fashion, like, isn't that nice that everything went back the way it should have been, but I find it tragic. She went to such lengths to escape and then still got dragged back home to be barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen. Vikings did not, as such, have a written language, so these stories were all recorded centuries later by Christian missionaries who did all of the writings.
Ben Little, how do women now compare with women of the past?
I'm of the school that there's really no difference. The fundamentals of human nature are the same. There were just a lot more social restrictions in the past, making it much more difficult for women to engage in piracy or anything else. I still think that a capable woman who had a sense of adventure and willing in the past to cross a few social lines could probably achieve as much as a man if she had the right circumstances. Let's say she were born into an Irish piratical family, she might be able to achieve as much as a man would, commanding at sea, as Grania did, or possibly if she could disguise herself. I really don't think there'd be a whole lot of difference, past and present, except that the opportunities are a lot better now. It's a lot easier for women to even serve in combat today, which is relatively recent.
There's still room for women pirates to adventure.
Let's go to Noella in Baltimore, Maryland.
I am creator of Lady Pirate Comics. It's a webcomic, and in addition to not being a record of women presenting as women, there were a lot of women who disguised themselves as boys and men to get on these ships and out on the open ocean. How it intersects with sexuality, because a lot of these women participated with prostitutes just as men did. Would it involve a look at their gender?
These are the only women that we know about because they're the ones that got caught. I mean, there were countless women undoubtedly who lived and died as men, and just the concept of a woman living as a man and visiting the local tavern and bod house and just what that would entail is a really tantalizing question that I wish we had so much more information about.
Laura, were any women pirates agents of the state?
Yes, we had Mary Read, who was in the Navy. She was passed off as a boy by her mother to collect inheritance from her own mother-in-law. So she was raised as a boy. She was a footman for a wealthy family and then joined the Navy and then left the Navy and then became a pirate. And she sailed with Anne Bonny and Jack Rackham in the Golden Age. So there were several women pirates. She's maybe the most notable one who had careers in the Navy and then left the Navy to turn pirate.
And there was an Islamic pirate.
Yes, Saida al-Hara. She is one of my favorites. She was the pirate queen of the Mediterranean. She did not, as far as we know, set foot on the ship herself, but she commanded this pirate empire. She was an ally of the feared Barbarossa pirates, the Barbary Corsairs out of Algiers. And when she married the king of Morocco, she made him come to her for their wedding. And it's one of the only times in history that the groom packed up and headed to her. Then she disappears from the records. She was married to the king of Morocco and ran the Mediterranean pirates, and we have no idea what happened to her.
Laura, you explore not only the lives of women living as pirates, but also the lives they left behind.
You can go back to Mary Read, that she had this very difficult childhood, being dressed as a boy and then in the service of others. There were other women who were prostitutes. They were victims of crime. They saw their parents murdered in front of them. In the case of Jacquot de la Haye, very few of them had really happy childhoods. I guess Anne Bonny was a beloved bastard daughter of her father, but they ended up leaving Ireland in shame when the affair was discovered. So I think really happy young ladies seldom turned to the sea. The worlds that they left behind, I think, contributed to their ability to be fighters, which is, I think, what led them to be so successful.
Are there journals or first-person accounts?
No! It kills me that we don't have these women's own words, with the exception of Sister Ping, who was a 20th century pirate who testified at her own trial. We know her view of what she was. Researching pirates is really a treasure hunt. There are accounts in historical journals, there are newspaper articles, there are legends passed down. I did a lot of work in the Library of Congress. I have a lot of very slim, rusty volumes that I picked up in my travels over the years. I have a pretty large pirate collection of literature myself. Just sort of trying to piece everything together is a really exciting part of this, because pirates, they don't exist on the record. They don't pay taxes. They don't get married in churches and register their birth certificates. So finding them is tricky.
We know Blackbeard. We know Captain Hook. How do you separate fact from fiction?
There are clues. We don't know 100% on nearly any of them, but if we have trial transcripts like we do for Mary Read and Anne Bonny, if we have many contemporaneous historical accounts, like Grace O'Malley, and primary source documents from the time is sort of a thumbs up that you're on the right track. But we don't really know for a lot of these women. And, I go into that in the book. But if their legends have lived this long, does it really matter if they ever lived at all?
Let's go to Nicole in Pembroke Pines, Florida.
Historically speaking, there's a lot of women who have commanded over men in different ways. And a lot of them use seduction and their sexuality. And I was wondering if that played a role into how these women pirates were able to command over their male counterparts, or if for the most part it was actually brute force.
That's a great question, Nicole. The only account, since we don't have first-person accounts from these women, we can really only make educated guesses. But we have Anne Anne Bonny, who was a paramour of Jack Rackham. And so, they had certainly some relationship going on. But the only account that I found of a woman using her sexuality is one written by a man, and which has sort of become discredited. The Dragon Lady from the 1920s in Macau. It doesn't seem like sleeping your way to the top was really a viable career path in the pirate world. I think, like you alluded to, it's more brute force and the exceptionalism that Ben spoke about, just being incredibly talented at what they did, which commanded the respect of the men.
What drew you to pirates as a book project?
Pirates is a lifelong love of mine. I loved Peter Pan as a child, and I went on the Pirates of the Caribbean ride at Disney World when I was 5. After that, it was a pirate's life for me.
I see. After all your research, what is most intriguing?
Just how much like them we still are today. The concerns of these women and their desires to live a full life and to be able to be in charge of their own destiny. These are concerns that I'm worried about, my friends are worried about. This adventurous spirit and this desire to be one's own woman, despite the fact I've never wielded a sword or shot a cannon, but I think I have a lot in common with these women, and I think most women do as well.
Laura Sook Duncombe and Benderson Little. Here's Grace O'Malley going out. I'm Jane Clayson in for Tom Ashbrook. This is On Point.
With an offer from the crown, high dispense boys of the Thames boys. It's Gracie breath to breath with the one Elizabeth.